Hello and welcome to Chapter 6, the final chapter of the Theology of the Body Bible study. This chapter was written by Janet Smith, who is an expert on the topic of contraception. She entitles this chapter, "The Pill, No Small Matter." My name is John Bishop, and I'm a focus missionary at the University of Maryland. And today I'm going to walk you through this article, give you some tips about how to turn this article into a successful Bible study. Note at the beginning, so the topic of contraception can be a difficult thing to explain, especially to people who aren't familiar with the church's teaching and might give you some pushback on this topic. For that reason, I'd encourage you to put a little bit more preparation time into this study than perhaps you would have in studies thus far. To that end, Janet Smith has listed several key resources on the topic of contraception at the end of the article that we've given you, and I'd invite you to make use of all of those resources, but most especially Janet Smith's talk, Contraception, Why Not? This is an excellent, easy to listen to, easy to understand talk, which gives some concrete and easy to understand resources, points about the immorality of contraception. Again, cannot recommend it any more highly. You can see the link to it at the end of the article. The talk is Contraception, Why Not? Further, any article, any resource that's written by Janet Smith and also Mary Eberstadt's book, Adam and Eve After the Pill, is especially helpful for this issue. All right, for my part, when I explain the immorality of contraception, I usually begin with an analogy that kind of sets you up to give a fuller argument on this topic. All right, consider the notion of an ecosystem and the idea of an endangered species. Most of your students, and in fact, I'm sure all of your students, will have a basic understanding for these topics. And they can be very helpful in explaining this issue, contraception. All right, so let's pick an endangered species. So let's say an endangered species of tiger in a region of Asia. If you were a scientist and you wanted to preserve this particular endangered species, so this particular species of tiger, then one thing you're going to want to do is to make sure that the ecosystem for this tiger remains healthy. So you might consider the average amount of rainfall that the ecosystem receives and preserving the appropriate levels of vegetation in the tiger's ecosystem. So you have rainfall, vegetation as two key elements of the ecosystem. And you know that if you were to tamper with either of these elements, there's a good chance that the tiger is not going to thrive. So most scientists, when they consider a species like this, like a complex species like a tiger, they naturally have a certain reverence for the species. They know that they don't have a complete understanding of all of the various elements, inner workings, of what makes for a healthy tiger. That said, they know that anytime they tamper with a key element of the ecosystem, it's likely going to have negative effects on the tiger. And here's the point. The use of contraception is very similar to removing a key element of the ecosystem for human love. When couples use contraception in their relationships, again, it's very similar to taking the appropriate level of rainfall or forest, or vegetation for an endangered species and removing it, and therefore keeping the species from a healthy experience. So in this way, contraception is really poisonous, not only for married couples and for love, but as any sociologist will tell you, so sex goes, so goes marriage. And so marriage goes, so goes the family. And since the family is the building block of society, so the family goes, so the culture goes. Contraception has devastating effects, not only on the relationship between men and women, but in fact on culture as a whole. I would commend to you this small encyclical here, written by Pope Paul VI, Humanae Vitae, on human life. This is the original document which in 1968 clearly expressed and affirmed the Catholic Church's teaching on the immorality of contraception, and it's vitally important for our discussion here today. In paragraph 17 of this document, Pope Paul VI is famous for, again in 1968, predicting the following. Paul VI said that if the use of contraception became more widespread, the following would happen. First, he said that you would see a very large increase in infidelity in marriages and a general lowering of sexual morality. Further, he predicted that men on the whole would lose respect for women, and they would fail to treat women with the dignity that they deserve. Finally, he predicted that governments would use contraception, sometimes by simple suggestion, but sometimes through more forceful means. They would use contraception on their population in an unjust way. And wasn't Pope Paul VI right? In fact, all of the predictions that Pope Paul VI gave in paragraph 17 of Humanae Vitae have come true. At the time, contraception was being put forward as something that would, in fact, result in healthier marriages and healthier families, and on the whole, a healthier society when it came to sexuality and family life. But if you look around at the 21st century and American culture with respect to these issues, you see that exactly the opposite is true. And it is for this reason that I don't know if the Catholic Church was ever more prophetic and more obviously inspired by the Holy Spirit than when she unequivocally condemned the use of contraception. All right, it's very important that when you're talking about contraception, you connect this discussion back to the studies thus far. So, Janet Smith does this for you herself in the article that you have on this website. But you might consider the following. So, the fundamental problem with contraception is that it separates what are referred to as the unitive and the procreative dimensions of the sexual act. And something about our closing ourselves off to procreation when we use contraception, something about that act makes us very selfish. Sex in its natural logic opens one up to the other and opens one up to children. And that way it naturally becomes a very, very selfless act. But this isn't the case with contraception. Contraception produces a mentality which is controlling. It produces a mentality which is selfish. And for this reason, it contributes to the severing, the separation of erotic love, eros, and selfless love, agape, like we talked about in the first Theology of the Body study. Further, in the first study of this series, we talked about the spousal meaning of the body. That men and women are made for one another. It's stamped in our very bodies to be unified with one another, but it's also worked into the very logic of our love as men and women, that our experience of sexual love would naturally be linked to the experience of procreation, at least an openness to procreation. And when we remove that element, again, it's akin to removing a key element of the ecosystem of married love. Now, you might ask, and several of your students will certainly ask, well, what does this mean? Do Catholics have to conceive a child each and every time that they have sex? Well, no, of course this isn't the case. And in fact, it's very prevalent in our day and age that Catholics would utilize the beautiful practice which is natural family planning. And Janice Smith has resources that explain natural family planning at the end of this of the article written here. You might ask, though, what's the difference between contraception and between natural family planning? Well, fundamentally the difference is this. Natural family planning works with the God-given ordering of sexuality that is proper to the human person, whereas contraception works against that natural ordering. And here again, it's very much like a scientist working with a natural ecosystem or working against it. It is for this reason that couples who use natural family planning almost never get divorced. They have a healthy respect for one another, for each other's dignity, and they have naturally a reverence for each other's bodies. The use of natural family planning is vastly different from the use of contraception, and again, I would encourage you to investigate these issues in more detail in all the resources that have been given for you here. This is the end of the Theology of the Body Bible study, and I'm very grateful to all of you for leading this study. Thank you for advancing the cause of the new evangelization and for putting all of your hard work and preparation into leading these various studies. Know that I'm praying for all of you and very grateful for the work that you have done. God bless.